welcome to another episode of Spotlight on CS Ops, our backstage pass, the folks that work in CS Ops. I'm here with my partner in crime, Matthew Lynn, over on the East Coast. Hi, Matthew. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Jean? I don't know. Is Austin East Coast? It's east of you, certainly. We'll
Feels
uh
super east
we'll
of
call it
me.
the East Coast of Texas, maybe. Sort of, maybe. But good enough. Great
Yeah,
to
great to see you as well. And we're here. We have the wonderful pleasure of chatting with Stephen Keogh today. Stephen held roles previously at ValueWise, where he was doing a lot of Gainsight implementations, and he's now leading a CS ops role for a company that is. I won't try to butcher any names or anything, but maybe Stephen, maybe you can give us an introduction about where you're currently at and a little bit about your previous background.
Sure. Great to chat, John and Matthew. It's great for the opportunity to come on and do this. Some of the other podcasts have been really good, so I'm looking forward to for a chat today. So, yeah, the company I'm at today is called Heidrick and Struggles. They are actually a more traditional professional services company that focused on executive search was their primary business. A couple of years ago, they kind of made a decision to diversify what their offerings were. So they set up a consulting business. There's been a few acquisitions along the way. They set up what they call an on-demand talent business, which is more short-term assignment type roles that they fill. And then there's a practice that I fall into, which is their Hybrid Digital. So essentially, Hybrid Digital has gone to market and realized that there's an opportunity. They have partnered with a talent acquisition company called Eightfold AI to build a platform that will support executive succession planning using AI and HR data and the fundamentals behind what is evaluated when you're determining what your succession plan for an organization will be. So with that in mind, that is a SaaS-based product, and that's when the need for a customer success team and in turn a CS ops function kind of started. So I'm probably one of the many people who found their role on Gainsight's famous job board forum that Nick Mehta posts every so often. So that's where I came across it. And at the time, I was with ValueWise, and it was a very interesting opportunity building the team with the ValueWise team. But the one thing that I'd never done is actually been a practitioner and done anything from the ground up. Consulting is great. It is an amazing way to learn a lot of things very quickly. But I kind of felt I was missing the chops of saying, you know what, I've done this myself from the ground up to build. So that was what really drew me to join Hydric.
I've heard a lot of folks say that, and I think I've heard both of you say it at some point in time. It's like the consulting world is your fastest way to a master's in CS ops because you see so much, and often the pace can be rapid as well. But that having that ownership or having that like I'm with this thing for the long term, it's sink or swim, and it all depends on me and the team that I get to assemble. There's something to that too.
No, definitely. And that is kind of when I was evaluating whether the move to Hydric was the right decision, that's kind of what synced it. It was like, you know what, who knows? I can end up back in consulting someday in the future. And that's never something I turn my back on. Consulting is an amazing opportunity, just the amount of people and the different problems you get to solve. But I feel like in the future, if I go back, I'll be so much better prepared because I'll have done it myself. And I'll understand the pains and the problems a lot more to it too.
I think one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got when I was looking at career changes or even shifts, like, oh, it's such a big thing. And people are always like, you can always go back, Matthew. You can always go back. And like, that's really very comforting advice. Really.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, just check it out, try it out. You know what? If it doesn't work out, you know how to do the consulting thing, you can go back.
And that was kind of how I ended up in the CS ops world, particularly Ross at ValueWise, is that I don't operate, moved to Canada seven years ago at this stage, and I needed a job. So I ended up in a support role for an environmental health and safety company. Quickly, their path out of support was to get into customer success. It was very much like a tier three support in their organization at the time. And they were just kind of moving into that value driven customer success. And that's my first experience of a CS ops role without really knowing what CS ops was. I was pulling data together from all these different systems that they had, like Pendo, Salesforce, all that sort of stuff, into a Power BI to build dashboards and try identify risks for customers. And at that point, it was doing it without realizing the name. And then I moved on to my next organization where I had where it's kind of where I landed on Gainsight, is my manager at the time was heading on maternity leave and they just needed somebody to manage a system. And I was like, okay, I'd never heard this Gainsight thing before. My history is HR systems consulting. That's what I did when I was back in Ireland. And I was like, you know what? Sure, I'll take on this and we'll give it a try. It was the old Salesforce edition. The dependency on Salesforce was probably my most frustrating part of that. And
I
like, I want to do all these
remember.
great things. And it's like, okay, we're out of Salesforce
Felt
fields.
bad.
Like, okay, cool. Um,
The three of
but
us
then
can probably reminisce about the Salesforce edition of Gainsight here, can't we?
Yes, I think
but
so. We've
But
all,
that then brought me to your point about like I made a decision then as I was leaving that company to be like, you know what, I love consulting and I knew HR systems. So an opportunity came up to go back to that. And I took the jump and I went back to a small company here in Toronto. And kind of 3 months in, I realized that it wasn't as fun as I originally remember as my first job. So then I met Ross and spoke to him and we had a connect and he just finished up, I think, the end of 2020, kind of growing the value adds team to where he needed it to be. And at the start of 21, he came back to me and was like, hey, we're going to add another role. Are you interested? And I was him and Han at the time. I was like, oh, I'm only in this role 3 months. That's going to look bad for me. If this value thing doesn't work out and I'm back on the market again in 3 months, I'm going to have these 2 short stints and that's going to go against me. And just the conversation was like, listen, in SaaS companies, in tech in general, it's less of a thing. Like people move within 6 months to a year, especially if you're in a consulting type role quite regularly. So yeah, so that brought me back into CS ops or back into CS and then kind of just took off from there.
so that's a super cool journey. Like you did a little bit of Gainsight work before joining ValueWise. I assume you did a whole bunch more Gainsight work at ValueWise. Is that pretty accurate? Or
That would be fair. That was probably 80% of the effort that I put into my time at ValueWise between, and if it wasn't doing the work, it was mentoring people in how to do the work. Like the great thing that I had at ValueWise is the chance to, I think there was 2 people I brought in, a friend of mine, Nico and James, and both had never touched Gainsight in their life. Both came in and they were both brilliant Gainsight admins, and that was an opportunity to do that at ValueWise, was to build people who would look at it more of a technical admin or technical acumen part of it. Like once they had that, Gainsight is the same as any other system. Your application of it is just what's important and the function behind it. So that was a great part of working at ValueWise too. But that was also, as I said, if I wasn't building, I was teaching other people to build.
and that's amazing. Like I still chat with Ross a lot, and I think like one of the cool factors in this community is like, yeah, ValueWise is definitely pumping out a lot of like great practitioners. You get just so much exposure to what other companies are doing. Like out of curiosity, how many customers or how many instances would you have been involved in previously?
And my time at ValueWise, 6, I think. No, actually, that's not wrong. 9, and 6 of them were just at 2 companies. So there is 2 companies we worked with who both had 3 Gainsight instances, like growth through acquisition. So that was a minefield in itself. For one, we managed to bring them all together into one, and the other kept and still had 3 Gainsight instances when I finished at ValueWise. The very different, and also in some cases they were the same customers in different instances. They were just related to different products. So suddenly an executive was like, I need to understand all of my customers at a customer level, care about the product by product. And you're like, how do we pull all this data together when one system uses 1, 2, 3 as an identifier and the other one uses ABC, right? It's an interesting challenge, but it was definitely probably the funnest challenges that were presented when we found ValueWise was those real unique situations.
I think one of those, we actually all worked at that one. And so we have
Hey,
that.
it's the one I was thinking of then, yes.
We have that in common. We weren't there
Yeah.
all at the same time, I don't think. Actually, maybe you two cross paths. I don't know if you guys cross paths at there, but boy, did I learn a lot. And I'm sure I would imagine you all think the same, because when you work in that kind of an environment where there's like just so many things going on, like once you go to the next one where there's only one instance and maybe smaller challenges, it's like you're so equipped, right, like for facing some of these bigger challenges further down the road. So
Is that true, Stephen? Let's just bear this out a little bit because I mean, you've been at the super tech. I think I've seen articles that you put out videos either on LinkedIn or maybe in some of the other communities that we travel together. So coming with that enormous stockpile of technical knowledge, but then ending up in a CS ops role where maybe you've got to exercise some muscles outside that bubble. Like, how is that for you?
Initially, it was probably pretty tough because as a technology consultant in general, you face a lot of business users pushing, this is how I want it to work. This is my solution. And you're like, this is the way I want to see it. And you're like, okay, but that's not the best way to do it. And like from a technology perspective, let's approach this in a different way. But also on the flip side, I probably approach things from a more technical focused mind and I wasn't seeing the full picture. So I think being in Value was especially my first project. So I kind of landed in, and the person who I was kind of meant to learn from at Value was decided to depart. So they just left of their own accord to go off and do something else. But then it also meant that I had a project that had been resourced and purchased and signed on, that I then had to go in and kind of start from scratch. Day three, I was on meetings with clients ready to go. And that kind of drove me to think about, okay, I need to put my business hat on here more and really make sure that my outcomes are met, regardless of what the technical solution of that is. That was a really big challenge. I've learned, like, back to my ValueWise days, like that was a big push and a big benefit I saw from that. I just realized that the technology can do so much, but sometimes putting a square peg in a round hole just because you can doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
That makes sense. Have you, one thing I've experienced, like when you're hired as a consultant and you have those best practices, you get paid to come to the table with those best practices. So they're like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Consultant, give me your goods because I'm paying you a lot of money. So like I'm expecting you to have all this knowledge. But then when you come in as a full-time employee, I've said this with others, and I've shared this story with others, and it seems like other folks have seen it, but I'm curious if you've seen it as well. Like you're on different hats. You're now like just a peer. And so sometimes you don't get as much push and pull because yeah, curious like if you've seen that in your experience as well, like that switch from FTE to consultant, and how did that transition work for you?
I think I was probably lucky that where Hydric is today, it is essentially the digital practice is in some ways like being in a startup, and our investor is the overall Hydric business. So we get to be agile and move through things very quickly with a core group of people who make decisions that don't need a big like board around the table to actually get anything changed. And so I was lucky that my CS practice director, so the person who manages the CSMs themselves, comes with a breadth of CS knowledge herself. So it comes in to say a lot that we talk about, we're kind of validating our own ideas. And I say a tweak here, she will say, okay, let's tweak this there. But we usually come to a consensus quite quickly because of how the operating model we're in, being quite a small team, and knowing that I have a lot of experience from a technology perspective and from a business perspective, having worked with ValueWise, she does take that kind of experience into consideration as well. So collaboratively, it's been very good. As my time as a consultant too, the longer I was at engagements, you would notice that trend too. So you would notice that trend into a trusted advisor where people would be more willing to just accept your best practice and guidance rather than pushing back on you just because you're the consultant. And I think it comes down to more of a relationship part of it and trust than just the consultant FTE kind of thing. If you build that trust in the first few weeks, great, but sometimes it can take months, whether you're an FTE or a consultant.
I found that is definitely the case. Like getting to trusted advisor, well, this would be interesting. Getting to a trusted advisor space is not something you can scale easily. Discuss amongst yourselves. I don't know if you can scale that relationship, or maybe you can. It'd be really interesting for us to figure out.
I think trusted advisor can be backed by reputation to some extent. So you probably get a leg up in the fact is that like having my reputation of having worked with ValueWise and been able to call out some of the companies that I've had the opportunity to work with, it probably makes the door a little bit more unlocked to get to trusted advisor. Whereas if I came in from the ground and was like, you know what, this is my first Gainsight I've ever seen, I'm taking a long time to get to trusted advisor. So like that trusted advisor, say, role that you'll fall into comes with experience and having the opportunity to say, okay, I've seen this problem before. I've seen your suggestions and they're great, but I've seen how this won't work. Let's think about how this can work with everything that we know.
In Texas, we would say this ain't my first rodeo, and I think in Gainsight circles, we'd be like, "This ain't my first Gainsight," right?
Yeah.
Not that, or we're always talking Gainsight here on this episode, but this one was particularly tool centric, just because we have some commonality here.
Yeah.
We say this in my first rodeo in Canada too. That must be a universal term now. So
Okay,
not
very
just for you Texans anymore.
good. Perfect.
So the this has been great hearing about your journey. Like what anything that you've learned along the way that you wish you had known like at the beginning, like before you even started at ValueWise, or even before you experienced Gainsight on Salesforce, or attached to the hip on Salesforce, like anything you wish you had known like before you started that, about CSOps, before that you would love to tell your younger self?
I think the one thing that I would have benefited more from is actually knowing what CS was. When I started in this, I had no idea. It was a fancy role in this company that I started, and that was my next step to a promotion. And I was like, go do this and you'll get there. Like, cool. They could have called it anything. They could have called it the system mechanic. They could have called it whatever. And I was like, I want that job. Right. So that was kind of, I think I didn't understand the value of going and actually learning what it was meant to be. And I'd say for anyone that is interested in CS, and even CS ops and CS leadership, is look at the different models of CS, but also the iterations, right? If we look back at history of most CS companies and most CS organizations, regardless of size, most of them started in the like part of support or part of services or these things where they kind of land or attached on to something and then they grow out on their own. Hopefully they grow into something that is truly value driven. Sometimes they never leave that. Sometimes support in some organizations, even large ones, is still a tier three kind of function today. So I think taking the time to understand what success is, what success could be, what it is at my organization, and being able to see that and being able to say, okay, is success the actual role for me and what I want to achieve? That would have been one thing that I wish I had spent a little bit more time on when I signed up for the CS role.
What is this CS that where I have a role of CS ops? So that seems like a very logical question to ask. So do you find CS is similar at companies, or do you see variation in CS like when you were in consulting roles? Did you see variations even in what CS did across your clients?
Yeah, very much. Some were product heavy, some were more value driven and financially heavy. Some were product specific inside organizations. Some were product agnostic in the sense that there was a suite of products. They cared about the customer, not the products they had. They had the supported of things like CS engineers, CS architects, all the things that they didn't care about what the product actually did. They cared about what the outcomes the customer got. On the flip side, a CSM is the one who does everything. Like for example, to get into the CS role I had, because it was an environmental health and safety company, I was told go and learn our environmental products. So like air emissions, waste, all these things, which I had no idea about. And I was like, if you can go and learn this in 2 months, you can have the CSM role. And I was like, okay, cool. I went and learned this and I learned what was equated to the product. And that was my first throw into CS, a true product master role, not necessarily a I'm driving value based on the product, not based on the outcomes that they wanted to achieve. So a customer calls in, is like, I have a problem with module X and feature Y. I I fix module X and feature Y, not necessarily understanding what the customer wants out of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like even talking like Toronto is quite a big startup community, same with kind of Vancouver and Austin now as well. If you talk to a lot of the CS that are in the startups of less than 100 people, it's like the CSM is the escalation point of support in the most cases, and they're expected to know their product reasonably well, if not be experts in it. And then as we get to mid-level and enterprise, CS does grow out of that in most cases, but that's when you have those architect roles and engineer roles, and you have those supportive functions that are really the product experts, and the CSM is the one that drives the value outcomes.
I feel like there's a lengthy discussion we could have, debate episode all on its own about do CSMs need to be product experts or not? I see there's a whole space there we can go explore.
I'd be happy to come back and have that debate too.
All right, we're gonna write that one down. Mhm.
What is I'm curious, so based on what you just described there, what is CS ops at your current company? Like how do you structure your team? What is your mandate or what is your focus?
So when I started, to be honest, they had made the decision to bring in a CS system. My experience with Gainsight brought me kind of to the top of the list of a good candidate for it. So that was the first task I had when I came in. And now it's actually to support both our success and support teams from a systems, process, and operations perspective. So my mandate is to ensure that we're able to meet the CS kind of goals, so like ratios and like potentially as we come down to it, renewal targets, ARR, ACV, those sort of things, NRR as well. Try and support the teams in doing that, but it's very much ground up. So I'm sitting with people being like, okay, this is our playbook for this. And we're saying like, we only have 10 playbooks, hypothetically. Let's get them into Gainsight and get our automations behind. How do we make sure the CSM is aware that these things need to happen? So that's what I meant when I said originally is like, it is like being in a startup and our investor is Hydric as the overall business, because we really are, it's build a CS ops function and support building a CS function overall. That's kind of the mandate that I'm working towards today.
That's cool. I like how you kind of like the beachhead for you to get into the role was really the systems, but you seem to have like quickly expanded it to workflow, figuring out like, the bigger components. And I really like that because oftentimes it's not just about what you build in the system, right? Like you got to make sure you have a right workflow. So you got to figure out like what are the KPIs that the business is really chasing after. And then you can put it in the system and make sure that it actually works and automate and all that stuff. But I really like how you approach that and kind of grew your scope to be beyond just more of a systems. So cool to see what and see you achieve that.
The one thing when I probably started is I had these, having come from the consulting world where I was dropping into instances of Gainsight left, right, and center that were a decade or like 5 years of bad building or iterations of process and all this sort of stuff, and a lot of waste and tech debt that was there. I had these, or kind of golden dreams of, I'm going to go in and my instance is going to be perfect. And within 4 months, I was like, that's harder to do from the start than you realize, especially when you're a startup type mindset where you're just every week we're iterating through how we handle our customers the best way and how we ensure they see the most value. So I could probably go back and if I had the time, sit down and say, okay, I probably wouldn't have built that. I probably shouldn't have set that up that way. This needs to be tweaked. There's a better way to do this. So I think that's the other thing that I would say is that sometimes it's making sure your CS team get the value from the product sooner, even when you come from kind of my mindset of trying to be technically like idealistic and it'll be the perfect system that's the cleanest and it'll be easy for anyone to read.
Down with tech
That
debt. Down with tech.
it's actually harder to do even when you're starting from scratch, especially in
Especially
the world of CS, right? Because things just change quite regularly.
that's yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing, especially in a startup, right? Where you don't start the world with like knowing all the pieces. You start with like this much view, and then you keep building it, and it's all of a sudden this big and now this big, and so then yeah, it's so hard sometimes to look back and see, okay, well, had we known the whole view, sure, I could have gone in and cleaned, but we didn't. And so yeah, you have to build patches and pieces along the way.
For sure. I'm doing some rebuilding. It's not a full rebuild, but I'm rebuilding portions of an instance now. And I'm sitting there debating like, okay, now I have this limb, if you will, that's not being used anymore. And shall I spend time to go clean that out? Or is it just fine just hanging out there because you've got more pressing new stuff that has to go in? I'm sure it's like the dilemma every product manager faces. We face it too as CS ops.
Are you is there any cool projects that you're working on that you're feeling like you're, I don't know, cutting edge or that you guys are innovating on very well?
Today, no, it's kind of it is truly foundation. So at the start of this year, we began to have a more broader conversation about product analytics. So I have the opportunity now to extend into working with our product team to discuss, are we at the right stage where that's, and a product like that, like Pendo, Gainsight PX or something like that would be a good addition to our tools, to our tech stack, to be able to support like CS team and obviously the product team too. So that will be a new one for me. I've used Pendo from someone else implemented it. I was a kind of receiver of the data, but that will, I think, be the most interesting thing that will come this year if we go ahead with it, just to be able to say, this is what our customers are doing. And in most of the companies that I've even consulted with, that is something that we had, and I think I took it for granted in the sense of like knowing this product telemetry. Oh, sure, it's related to a health score and it triggered these one or two different things, but not having it is so much more damaging than I originally thought. So I've been able to say, okay, how do we make sure our customers are seeing value? Are they, clicking in the right areas? Are things too complicated for a customer to be able to use the product, and is that causing frustrations to that customer? Even things like putting in onboardings and saying, do we really need a training session to show the customers these new buttons, or do we just throw a guide in there and hope that it works and guides them through what they need to know?
Very cool. And maybe Matthew, your famous question that we seem to have on every show.
I'm becoming a bit of a
prediction.
on this question. So, Stephen, you've been in this field. You've had several roles. Give us a prediction or two on what you see in the future of CS ops or Gainsight administration. What do you see down the road?
That's a broad question. I think that, and you've probably got this question answered a few times, the advancement of AI will help in a lot of ways from all functions. I think it will give us the opportunity to potentially open CS ops to more junior people, which in turn will make it, a more accessible career. And I think in that context, I mean, like Gainsight using AI for administration, that sort of stuff, been able to facilitate those things. And I honestly think that we're probably going to see a more educational transformation as well. Is that CS is coming to the point of a function that you potentially can go to study. There's a handful of courses in the US, actually could be less than a handful at this stage. And I think we will see an expansion of that around the world. I think that, I'm going to college or university, you may not have a course. It may be like a module or a few courses together. You're not going to have a degree in CS, I don't believe, at least in the short term, but it will definitely be something that's included in like business and those sort of things, if it's not already today. The reason for that is that it's just becoming such a needed function in a lot of companies. There's still some quite large companies who don't even consider CS valuable today, and I think that will change. So I think teaching people from an early age, like as I said, what I started in my first CS role, I didn't know what it was. If I knew what it was coming out of college, I may have just gone for that rather than HR consulting that I did, because I was like excited and interested in what CS could have been. So I'd say in the next 2 or 3 years, the actual education towards CS will increase.
I'm starting to see that everyone's here and there, or like I'll see it go by my LinkedIn feed. There's a college is stepping in, or maybe it's a certificate. It's not a full-blown degree. So yeah, I think you're right. I think this thing's on the rise, and yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna question that AI prediction either.
Yeah.
It's here. It's gonna be here. I think it's up to us to figure out how and where it fits, not if it fits.
Agreed.
Totally agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Stephen. And it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you more and getting to hear a bit of your story and some of the learnings that you have in the past. So thanks again for joining us here today.
No problem. Well, thank you both. And if you do end up going down the what a CS product knowledge needs to be, or any other topics that you need a panel for, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to join again.
Awesome.
Right. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Thank you both. Have a good rest of your week.
You as well.
Bye-bye.